Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Public Safety Solutions for Substance Use Disorder Echo. My name is Julio Soroblanco, and I will be the facilitator for today's session. This Echo is brought to you by the Center for Substance Use and Training in Telementoring, also known as CSTAT, by Be Well Texas in collaboration with the UT Health San Antonio's Echo program. A few housekeeping rules before we begin. We have live closed captions available for today's session. If you would like to view closed captions for this session, please navigate to the bottom of your Zoom window and select the Show Captions option. If you're having trouble accessing captions, please chat our Echo IT. To help us with attendance, please enter your full name, affiliation, and email into the chat. Please remember to stay muted unless you are speaking, and we encourage you to join by video and using the chat and/or raise your hand feature to pose questions or share perspectives throughout the session. If you are having connection issues, please privately chat UT Echo IT for assistance. As a note, these sessions are being recorded and will be shared on our website. Therefore, to ensure privacy, no personal health information is allowed at any point during the session. This includes clients' names, client or patient names, addresses, birth dates, and/or any other identifiable information. At the end of the session, the Echo team will send out a post-session survey link. We kindly ask you to complete it as it provides feedback on how to refine these sessions to better address your priorities. We are approved for CEs for paramedics and any public safety professionals with a behavioral health degree, such as social work or counseling credentials. Finally, Echo is an all-teach, all-learn environment, and we do encourage everyone to participate in the conversation and raise questions. With that, we'll move on to some team introductions. First up, we have Jeremiah Golka.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be with you again this month. Jeremiah Golka. I'm the Executive Director of the SHIELD Training Initiative based out of Northeastern University. We do our trainings are a mix of operational safety and health for our first responder, police, other criminal justice audiences, bundled with public health oriented practices to help boost practices will boost I'm using that word twice. Boost practices will boost the positive outcomes that we want for our trainees as well as people who use drugs. Looking forward to the conversation.
Next up, we have Dr. Brandon Del Pozo.
Hey, Julio. Thanks for facilitating. It's great to be here again. My name is Brandon Del Pozo. I'm a professor of medicine and public health at Brown University, study addiction, overdose, especially as it relates to police practice. And before that, I was a police officer for 23 years, 19 in the New York City Police Department and 4 as the chief of police of Burlington, Vermont. Been to Texas a few times. I'm wearing a Texas belt buckle. I bought at Cavender's way back. So it's always great to connect with folks on the Zoom.
It's great to have you all here.
The belt buckle. Yeah.
Next up, we have Dr. David Miramontes.
Hi, I'm Dr. Dave Miramontes. I'm at UTL San Antonio. I'm the medical director with the San Antonio Fire Department. And we have a very aggressive EMS-based buprenorphine program and harm reduction process with 2 teams out every day. And happy to be here to facilitate the conversation.
Great. And last but certainly not least, we have Cynthia Mendiola, who is also our didactic presenter for today.
Good morning. My name is Cynthia Mendiola. I am a retired federal probation officer. I did 34 years with the criminal justice community corrections supervision, and I am a coach and trainer in core correctional interventions. Thank you for being here.
And thank you all of you for being a part of our team. And our case presenter for today is Mike Sasser.
Hello, how you doing? My name is Mike Sasser. I'm captain with Austin Travis County EMS. I can handle all of our substance use programs because we have multiple sides of it. We have the buprenorphine program, we have the overdose follow-up and the harm reduction side of it, as well as we have a Librium and alcohol program as well. Are we ready to get started, or do we just go ahead and dive in, or what are we doing? Sorry,
We're going to do our didactics. No worries at all. We're going to start off with our didactics. We'll have some announcements, and then we'll move on to the case presentation.
Gotcha.
All right. And thank you for being here, Mike. So with that, let's get started with our didactic presentation. Cynthia, once you share your slides, you may take it away.
Okay. I'm not very techy, so we'll see if it works. What do you see?
We see your slides.
Okay, great. Welcome everyone. I am excited to be here, and today we're going to be talking about reducing recidivism using cognitive behavioral interventions or cognitive behavioral therapy, and we're going to direct it towards individuals who have substance use disorders, but it applies to all individuals. And I would like to put in a disclaimer a little bit here because we will be talking about individuals who are have been imprisoned, who have been on community supervision, and those individuals are the ones that we will be talking in this session. Moving on to the next slide, we have some disclosures. All speakers and all members of the planning committee have no relevant financial relationship with a commercial interest to disclose, and the views and opinions expressed by the participants and speakers attending the ECHO sessions are solely their opinions and do not reflect the official positions or policy of UT Health San Antonio. With that, let's move into what are the objectives of this program or this session that I'm going to be presenting. The objectives is to provide a historical review of the cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, identify some evidence-based principles for effective interventions in this community supervision, explain the criminogenic needs and how they relate to CBT and individuals with substance use disorders. And then again, maybe just if we have some time, discuss some cognitive behavioral principles and how they apply to the individuals that are on supervision. At the very end, if we have some time, I have a recording of what probation officers are trying to do in working with individuals in community supervision. And so what we really need to look at is, first of all, is evidence. What is evidence-based practice? And that is clinical and administrative practices that have been proven to consistently produce specific and intended results. The evidence involves specific research, results on the program and/or practices. The quality of the research performed is essential in determining whether a program or a practice is evidence-based. So the better the research, the more likely the results are accurate. In community supervision, we have evidence-based principles, and these evidence-based principles have to be in place in an organization in order for interventions to be effective. Okay, so we look at these principles, and it primarily starts, number one, is an organization needs to assess with an actuarial risk and needs assessment. It's key in order to identify what the risk, needs, and responsivity is for individuals on supervision, and also in the prisons and state prisons as well. Okay, I'm little, like I said, I was not very techy here. So the second one is to enhance intrinsic motivation with individuals. Okay, enhancing intrinsic motivation is key. The third one is to target interventions. I don't know why. Are you seeing this? There it is. Target interventions that include the risk, the needs, the responsivity, the dosage, which is how much how much of the intervention, and then treatment. So the next, these are all 8, so I'm on number 4. The skilled training is directed practice using CBT methods. So we need to have individuals skilled in that training and have directed practice. We also need to increase positive reinforcement any and every time we have an opportunity with individuals on supervision. Also, engage ongoing support in the natural communities, which is to include individuals to transition them into the natural communities, which is once they're in supervision, we make efforts to transition them into the community, into the continued services that they can have, whether it's treatment services or whether it's support groups or tying them into peer support individuals and any and all in the natural communities. The next thing is to measure relevant processes and practices. So you have to be able to measure the relevant processes and the practices that you're doing in this organization that are based on evidence-based research. And then the last thing is to provide measurement feedback. So these are really important. All these 8 principles need to be present in order for intervention to be effective with individuals on supervision. And so much of the research today dates back to the 1990s, which was done by the Canadian researchers Don Andrews, James Bonta, R.D. Hogue, and others. And it was in response to Martinson's 1974 study that pretty much indicated that nothing works in offender rehabilitation. This research is known as the What Works research in offender rehabilitation and the foundational risk, need, and responsivity theories and concepts. So the researchers were the catalysts in discovering the determinants of recidivism, and they laid the groundwork for evidence-based practices in community corrections. So it moved the field of corrections to adopt 3rd and 4th generation actuarial risk assessments, which is the first principle that I mentioned in the previous screen. And then the strategies grounded and supported by empirical data. And so from this research, we had the strategies that also reinforce why we feel that CBT is the best approach with individuals in this population. So the research started the process of analytically identifying the risk, the needs, and the responsivity for a justice-involved individual. And so in order to lower a person's risk to reoffend, first, we must understand what is putting them at risk, and then we must work to understand why. And those are really 2 important things, and we have the research to help us to identify those things. So again, the core content of this is the risk principle, the need principle, and the responsivity principle. So let's start a brief review. So the principle of R&R is stress. I can't stress enough the importance of it, and of not knowing these theoretical concepts, but applying them daily as practical concepts. And when I say practical, is that we actually work with them. It's just not written out in paper. It's not in a research. We actually work with, we ask probation officers to, and other individuals, especially therapists and counselors who work with probation officers, with individuals in a community supervision setting, to do work in practice in these areas. And so the use of an actuarial assessment it helps to identify the risk and the needs categories, okay? And then when we talk about risk, it's about being more intentional with moderate to high and intensive clients, okay? And the reason there's a lot of research and there's not a lot of time for this, there's a disclaimer here. A lot of this information is not just simple, it's in-depth, and it takes a lot of training and a lot of more lectures, but the reason we don't target low-risk offenders is because many of those are their risk is very low, of course, like I said, and they tend to self-correct. So once they've gone into the system, they made a mistake, there was a judgment in error, so they learn from that and they tend to self-correct. Moderate to high risk offenders, we're going to talk more about this, have more entrenched attitudes, values, and beliefs that need to be targeted. So let's move on to the next one. The need principle is to identify the person's criminogenic needs. We talk about criminogenic needs. They are those areas that are identified as being areas that we need to target, that are changeable, that are dynamic, okay? There are static and there's dynamic criminogenic needs. The static is a criminal history, and you can't intervene on criminal history. It's already happened. But the criminogenic needs are the ones where there are areas that we can intervene and work in so that we can make some changes, and positive, of course. In the responsivity principle, it is about assessing a person's learning style. what is this person's learning style? What's their preferences? What is their motivation to change? Are they in pre-contemplation? Are they contemplating? Where are they in the process of change in order to be able to intervene the right strategies and the right interventions? So you modify your approach in using the core correctional intervention strategies and skills and interventions to match these areas, their learning style, preferences, motivation. And so you assess their stage of change and respond by enhancing motivation or skill building strategies. And this next one is very busy, this next slide. But I just want to target you or have you just look at the fact that moderate to high, and very high risk individuals are the ones that we target in this area because they're the ones that are going to make the most change. If they're willing to change and we're able to intervene with the right strategies. And so the other thing I want you to also look at is how many hours do you contribute to these individuals? And that's important. And that goes with some of the dosage studies that have come out where research is aimed at determining the type and the amount of interventions. And excuse because I have offender there, but I think we really want to say justice involved individuals and kind of move away from offender. It's just an older slide, and I apologize for that. So the next thing, so part of implementing the interventions, there is this concept of, like I said, dosage. So studies vary in numbers of hours recommended, but all generally suggest that over 100 hours for high risk, 100 hours for high risk, many are in the 200 or 300 hour range. And this is hours that officers spend with these individuals, actually working on interventions with them. And so that is a range more or less from 100 to 300. So to make the point that even if you took the lowest number, which is 100, that still means that we have to provide interventions along with the treatment providers. And the amount of dosage is basically what officers, the times that officers are doing, and it's not in conjunction with treatment. So let's start, I'm sorry. With the risk assessment, probation officers and counselors are able to identify the dynamic risk factors. These are the ones I was talking to you. We call them dynamic risk factors, criminogenic needs. They're called interchangeably. And they are so this once we know what their criminogenic needs are, then we have a map to follow the identified targeted areas, and that is where we can target our interventions. So theoretically, theoretical concepts are a daily part of the probation officer's interactions and can transfer on to the counselors and therapists working with individuals with substance use disorders and mental health services as well. Officers are identifying a person's criminogenic needs, a person's stage of change related to their peer group, and then respond with motivational enhancement strategies or skill building techniques. They're assisting persons on supervision to identify their risky thinking patterns, changing, and then work on skills to manage those risky thoughts. They're also assessing a person's antisocial behavioral patterns and then work on skill building to address those deficits. If these activities are not a part of the daily contacts, then the answer on the previous slide, how many hours do you contribute, is likely 0. And that's really important. That's an important key thing to understand. If officers are not working in these areas, they're not doing what evidence-based strategies or interventions. They're not working in the evidence-based area, and there's not going to be any change. With that being said, let's quickly look at cognitive behavioral therapy and its origins, why it works best to reduce recidivism. CBT falls under the responsivity principle, which is the last one, and that is looking at styles, motivation to change, all of those areas. So the history of cognitive behavioral programming, let's look at that just really quickly. Cognitive restructuring interventions began in the 1950s with Aaron Beck's work with the mental health clients and depression. In the 1960s, Albert Ellis is called the grandfather of cognitive behavioral therapy. He brought in, I'm sorry, I'm trying to, REBT, Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy, looking at irrational thinking. And in the 1970s, we had Yockelson and Samanow, who were the ones who came up with, from their research, they have a renowned in their research in criminal thinking patterns. In their research, Samanow and Yockelson concluded that criminals develop much deeper and stronger entrenched habits of bad thinking. So you have some thinking errors, they reinforced each other, they're thinking errors that reinforce each other, and they fuel ongoing antisocial behavior. And so we're looking at we're moving on to the 1980s when we have Jack Bush, who developed the cognitive self-change program in the 1980s, and that had a lot to do with teaching cognitive restructuring and how we can apply that to interventions with individuals in the community supervision settings and in the prison settings. The 1980s, okay, so moving on to the 1990s and 2000, we had cognitive skills programs and interventions that came up in those years. Barry Glick and Ross and Fabiano were the ones who came up with programs and interventions in cognitive skills and cognitive, well, I can't remember the other word, but I'll come up with it in a little bit. So Juliana Taymans came up with a good program in those years for problem solving. So all these individuals gathered together and produced and developed a program called Thinking for a Change, and then it's a curriculum used as an intervention for justice-involved individuals. And it includes all of these areas: cognitive structuring, cognitive skills, and problem solving. So let's look at the next this analogy. Jack Bush is the developer of the cognitive self-change program, and I really like this this analogy of the iceberg. He talks about part of thinking, part of behavior. I'm sorry. Most of the time we see people's behaviors, and we don't see that it's deeper in, there are internal behaviors, which includes the distorted thinking patterns, the attitudes, values, and beliefs, the their basic human needs, things that individuals have within themselves. So we fail to see the internal behaviors, which are the thoughts, beliefs, and feelings, the self-worth, the survival, all those components when somebody displays an external behavior. For example, someone uses drugs, or someone commits an offense of stealing a wallet, or other crazy types of crimes. We don't see the internal behaviors that go within, that are happening within. And this is just an example of the analogy. So we have the behaviors on the outside of the iceberg, and then with below the iceberg, you see much bigger and more entrenched things that are happening. And I like that analogy, so I thought I'd share it with you. So looking at the analogy of the iceberg, we see individuals displaying risky behaviors such as substance use. What's involved in that process of helping individuals change that behavior is very complicated, and understanding it, where the motivation lies, is important. And when I talk about that, and that's another big training, is that they're drivers for people's behaviors, drivers for why they act in a certain way. And in order for an individual to change that external behavior, the internal behavior has to be recognized. It's got to be identified, and as the driver of identify what the driver of that behavior is. And so We need to change, that needs to be changed with effective replacement of the internal behavior. So that's where CBT comes in. It's the replacing those antisocial attitudes, values, and beliefs, and to continue on ongoing use of the new internal and external behaviors. Cognitive restructuring versus cognitive skills. What do we mean by that? And a lot of people have always kind of confused that, but cognitive restructuring focuses on what individuals think, and it focuses on that area and replaces those thoughts that result in negative consequences. Whereas cognitive skills teaches how to think and act in more pro-social ways. And one thing that always stuck with me in all of the trainings I've had for many, many years, I've been doing this for many years, is that we always looked at, if you teach an individual with antisocial attitudes, values, and beliefs, only the cognitive skills, then you teach that person to act and think and act in a pro-social way, but never actually change their entrenched antisocial attitudes, values, and beliefs. If you know what I'm trying to say, is that you just make a smarter criminal or a smarter individual to act and behave in certain ways, but never actually believe in changing those ways. So you really don't change that person's behavior. They're just doing it in order to get by. This is really very important, and both both go hand in hand. But we also look at, where does this come from? We have the cognitive behavioral model, which teaches cognitive restructuring. It also increases awareness of antisocial thoughts and develops a skill and ability to replace risky thoughts, resulting in more positive outcome. And from my experience, I can tell you that individuals, moderate to high individuals, have not and do not know, or they're not aware of those antisocial thoughts until you start having them sit down and examine that. When they start to sit down, slow down, and they're not automatic thoughts anymore, they're sitting down and they're actually examining them, at that point, it's hard to dispute those thoughts, those antisocial attitudes, values, and beliefs. So in the core correctional practices, within some of the programs that have been coming out for training officers, one is called EPICS, which is the state training. STAR is a federal training, and STIX is the Canadian training. All of these have several interventions and skills and strategies. In the cognitive behavioral model is one of them. So let's look at the theory behind this intervention skill. This is one that's used. The cognitive model is one of two core correctional intervention skills based on the cognitive behavioral chain. So we look at the cognitive behavioral chain, and that is, officers are trained in this concept, which is the heart of CBT, and it's a combination of two therapeutic approaches known as the cognitive therapy and the behavioral therapy. So the basic principle behind CBT is, however, always the same. What we think, how we feel, and how we behave are all closely connected. This model is also used in relapse prevention for substance use disorders and criminal behavior, antisocial attitudes, values, and antisocial behavior. It works in all areas of change when using cognitive restructuring techniques and focus. So let's look at an example of the cognitive behavioral chain and how it applies. And so when we talk about external event, we talk about something that happens outside of ourselves, a situation or are ultimately outside of an individual's control, but they can be influenced by behavior. The next one is what the internal response was, what a person thinks or believes about a situation, how the individual interprets the external event, the feelings that occur as a result of the thoughts. And this is really key because feelings are a result of the thoughts. Okay, it's not feelings first, it's the thoughts are first and the feelings come behind. Then also the physiological response, the body's automatic physical reaction. Um, is there perspiring? Are they tightening their fists? Are they clenching their jaw? Those kinds of physiological responses. And then you have, of course, the behavior, the actions and behavior in response to their thoughts and feelings about a situation. Ultimately, that behavior always has consequences, and the consequences are, can be anything. I mean, the outcome that occurs as a result of the behavior, problematic behaviors often have a ripple effect, impacting other areas, families, impacting their families, impacting their jobs, impacting in, social interactions with other people, all of those things. So let's look at an example just really quickly. I hope I'm not going too fast for everyone in understanding this material, but I know I'm constrained. I have a constraint in time. But if we look at this next process, we look at looking at the unwanted behavior. So let's look at the example of just using drugs. Okay. To teach how the model works, you always start with a behavior. For example, I stole a wallet, I used drugs, I broke into someone's home, and the outcome is the next thing that you look at, because once you have a behavior, you have an outcome. You're not even looking at external and internal behaviors yet. So your outcome is I messed up 1 year of sobriety, got called in to submit a urine specimen. I jeopardized my employment. I was embarrassed to tell my employer. I was really mad and disappointed at myself. So those were consequences of that particular behavior. So let's look at the next thing that we look at is the external event. So the external event is I got out of work late after being reprimanded by my boss for making a mistake with a customer, and I stopped at my cousin's home before going home. Okay. But let's look at the internal response. This is not very different. I mean, some of us might want to go and talk to somebody, and talk about what happened that day, but let's look at what's going on in the internal behavior. One thing about doing this, and one thing about officers applying this, and even if you're in the prison setting, and I just want to make this clear, is that remember that moderate to high risk individuals that have been through to prison and their internal behaviors is entrenched, that they are going to think very much differently from us. Okay, and one reason I say that is because you have pro-social thoughts and you have antisocial thoughts. Most of the time we may have a criminal thought, like I might want to speed, but and that's a crime, but it might be a minor one, but it's still a crime, and a lot of us won't do it, right? But with individuals on that are on community supervision and they're high risk offenders, they think differently. And so what I'm trying to say is when you're working with an individual in a CBT or in these interventions, do not censor their thinking. Okay? Because if you start censoring how they think, then you're actually telling them, this is how I want you to think, and this is what I want you to record. And there's a difference between that because an individual, like, for example, I'm going to read this one here. I can't believe my boss yelled at me in front of other people. What an a-hole, okay? An a-hole is something I'm going to say because I don't want to teach you this and express myself in an unprofessional manner. But an individual that is a high risk to moderate to high risk offender will not be that generous in labels. And we have to make sure that we know that he examines exactly how he thinks, and that we don't censor that, because that is what's going to have to be changed. The next one is, I'm such a screw up. I need to calm down and relax. I need a drink. I'll stop by Josh's maybe. Maybe he has something to calm me down. Just this one time won't make a difference. Okay. So if you look at some of these thoughts, and I was I censored very, very much just for us, right? But if you look at some of these thoughts, there are 1 or 2 or 3 thoughts in there that are risky, and they're permission givers. And they're the ones that provide that entrenched thoughts and internal behavior that pushes the individual, that drives the individual to actually use drugs, if that makes sense. So I'm going to give you an example, a quick example. I was teaching this in the state prison, and a lot of my individuals that I was teaching were coming in, and they were upset and just ready to just beat up somebody. And we said, okay, what's going on? And they were really upset with a guard. I said, all right, let's get into doing a thinking report. Everybody is working on this. And I did not censor their thoughts, and their thoughts were antisocial, really bad. And so we went through all of them, and we looked at the thinking patterns. And I said, okay, so let's look at all these thinking patterns, and what's the result? And that person says, well, I'm going to beat him up. And if I see him in the street one day when I get out, I'm going to beat him up there too. And I said, so how can we think in a different way so that you have a right to be angry, but you don't act in that kind of a behavior, but it's a different behavior that won't get you in trouble. And so then we start working on different thoughts to replace some of those thoughts that person was having, along with everybody in the group sharing that information, right? And coming up with different thoughts that would probably reduce the anger or the rage to more of an anger and maybe an unpleasant behavior, like just being frustrated instead of wanting to talk back or beat somebody up in prison or in jail. So what I'm trying to say is the guards didn't quite like that I had that posted on the wall, but I explained to them that if I didn't work with them in this capacity, that the result would be much worse. And so they pretty much understood that. But it was because I didn't censor their thinking, and we actually paid attention to what were those thoughts that were going on in that person's mind. So moving on to the next one. So let's go do an example. Let's go look at an example of how and remember, I'm telling you, this is very simplified and it's much more complex than what I'm making it. But it takes a lot more training, not more lectures. But the outcome result here is, look at the behavior. Let's look at behavior. So you stopped and said hi to Josh, but left cousins home right away. Okay. The consequences for that is I still maintained my sobriety, got called in to submit a urine specimen. No substances were detected. I felt relieved that I didn't use the substance, and I'm proud of myself. So if you look at the external event, is he got out of work late after being reprimanded by his boss for making a mistake with a customer and stopped by his cousin before going home. Same external event, but the only thing that's changed is the thinking. So I can't believe my boss yelled at me in front of other people. Maybe he's having a bad day. I have to show him I can do better. I know I can do better. I need to relax and calm down. I can't have a drink. I have to stay sober. I've worked too hard. I want to talk to someone better get home as soon as possible. And let me just qualify this. For one of those thoughts that we saw in the other one, for example, one episode of drinking or using drugs is not going to make a difference. So for that one negative thought and permission giver, with an individual that is high risk and moderate, has so many of those kinds of thoughts that you have to have, I call them intervening thoughts. You have to have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 intervening pro-social thoughts in order to counter the one. And so we have to help individuals to come up with as many as they can that will provide them with the ability to not take that step and act on using drugs. And again, this is very simplified because there's so many drivers. They could be drivers of an individual is self-medicating, an individual is just has some entrenched thinking and antisocial thinking. There's drivers, they're hanging out with the wrong people, and so they're just peer influence. So there's so many other things. It's not that simple. And that's where the work has to be done with the counselors and the probation officers. Okay. So I'm going to move on.
Hey, Cynthia.
Yes.
If we
Okay,
could wrap up after this slide.
I'm done, right? So let me see where I can go so that I can tell you. Okay, so just cognitive restructuring is a learned skill. It requires motivation to change. It requires understanding of how thoughts drive behaviors. It's an awareness of risky thinking and knowing what behaviors follow, an ability to identify new pro-social thinking that is powerful and effective, and then recognizing high-risk situations that are likely to trigger the risky thinking. So the skill to slow down the thinking in a risky situation and to evaluate and replace those thoughts. So that's the main thing about the cognitive model, and that's how we can work with individuals with substance use disorders. Thank you. We didn't have time for the recording, but that's okay. We'll do a part 2.
Thank you so much for this great, Cynthia. We do have just a moment for quick questions. Does anybody have any questions for Cynthia regarding her presentation today? It was certainly a lot of information. I think it was very, very interesting, though, for sure. I know I've heard of CBT and I've heard it used in therapy a lot. So it's very, very interesting that that is sort of the gold standard that you all are using. If you all do have any questions, we definitely encourage you to post them in the chat for Cynthia. Cynthia, if you wouldn't mind answering any questions that pop up there. With that, Karen, would you please share the didactic for today's session? And Mike, once she does, feel free to take it away.
Okay, thanks for hearing us out and wanting to hear about this case. I chose this case because it's very harm reduction focused. The client patient involved was a 37-year-old female. She was living alone in a one-bedroom apartment complex, not lower income apartments. I know that the VA uses that one for some of their rehousing programs as well. So it's kind of tells you about the neighborhood itself specifically. She described it as she had been at her rock bottom for a couple of days, as she put it. She had actually overdosed twice in the 24 hours or so before this particular event. She had gotten the Never Use Alone phone number from one of the people that we had worked with in the past. And so she was at home alone and using the Never Use Alone phone number to use. And when she stopped responding to him, the operator from Never Use Alone contacted 911. The one thing that she says that two things that seemed to go really wrong were that she did not unlock her door, and that she never gave her apartment number to the people at Never Use Alone, to the operator. The field crew responded. They called 911 and sent an ambulance there. And it's a relatively small apartment complex, and everybody all the buildings are right there in like this one little courtyard area. And the medic that was running the call told me what happened was he kind of fat-footed the big air horn as he was getting out of the bus, and ended up basically sending out the giant loud air horn into the courtyard, and everybody in the apartment complex came outside to see what was going on, except for two doors didn't open. And he said, "You check that one, and I'll check that one." And he went to the door and found her dogs freaking out inside the apartment, and realized that was the apartment. Forced entry into the apartment, and found her unresponsive and apneic in the bathroom. Um, um, according to according to the PCR from the initial vitals, she was apneic. Had the SpO2 initial reading was 8, and end tidal was 27 as they were doing it. She was given 1 milligram of intranasal Narcan. This was at 2:30 in the afternoon when this happened. She was given 1 milligram of intranasal Narcan initially. They were ventilating her with a BVM and some oxygen and stuff like that, doing normal patient care stuff. Before she came back, I think they ended up giving her a second milligram of Narcan a few minutes later. And then she woke up. She felt a little nauseous. She told me very much that what mattered to her most was that how the field crew had treated her like a human being and expressed concern for her, and she'd never been treated like that like at her hospital stays or any other events that she had overdosed, and it really, really made an impact. And they didn't want to leave her alone. So what they did was they started calling all of her friends and had her peer coach and sponsor come out. But they also called the case manager from our program. We have a bunch of single unit responders that and Adam Balboa, who's actually here today, as well as the lead case manager for the program. He actually responded to the call. We made sure that she was not alone and that she had some support and that she had been given like plenty of Narcans to be safe, and that they were going to watch it and said, look, we're here for you when you need help. When you're ready to do this, and we just had the harm reduction conversation with her to help her stay safe in what she was doing. It was I think a couple of days later that she ended up calling the duty phone and saying, I am sick, I do need help, and reached out. And then I went to initially to meet her. And initially when we found her, she had a COWS of 17 when I found her. So we went ahead and gave her 8 milligrams of buprenorphine, monitored her for an hour. At the end of the hour, her COWS was 9. She was given another dose of 8 milligrams of buprenorphine, and her final COWS was about 4. I called Community Care, which is our local FQHC, which has an MAT program. We called them, scheduled an appointment. We scheduled an appointment for her, and it looked like we were going to have to basically keep her in meds and support her for the next 4 or 5 days. And so we basically did repeat visits daily to dose her. The second day when I went back to dose her, she said that the 16 milligrams made her feel a little bit better, but it kind of made her feel a little bit more amped up than she wanted to be. And she asked if we could give her less than that. So we gave her an 8 milligram dose, and she actually did much better at the 8 milligram dose. So we just daily dosed her at 8 milligrams for a couple of days. I think we also refilled one of her, I think it was, what was it? Seroquel for her as well. We thought through our PAs and made sure that she had all of her psych meds and make sure she was connected to all of those things as well. And we saw her every day, and she did so well, and she was so appreciative of everything, and it made such a difference. A couple of weeks ago, she reached out to me and said that because when she told me the story about how the impact and how the field crew had made such an impact for her, I said, well, if you ever want to thank them face to face, just say the word. And so she called me a couple of weeks ago, and I went and picked her up and took her to the station to meet the crew so she could thank them in person. And it was 2 days before her 6 months of sobriety. So that's kind of an abridged version of the whole story. We're happy to take any questions you have about how we do things.
So, Mike, good case. Did you guys dive into why do you think she was so upset? We just had this lecture on cognitive behavioral therapy. So what was the external factor that led her down this path? Or the factors? Why was she having such a bad week when she overdosed?
As she put it, she had, it was a relationship kind of issue. And she had this very toxic girlfriend that she had been in a relationship with. And that person had relapsed, and she was trying to maintain sobriety around that, and the whole thing is what ended up just driving her down the edge. She said the girl really got to me, as she put it.
Good. And then did you dive into her case? In this case, does she have any underlying mental health issues, socioeconomic issues that need to be addressed? We try and, Cynthia was talking about what are the external factors, and it sounds like this young lady may have a number of factors that led her to use.
Yes. So she's got a history of bipolar as well. She takes gabapentin, Seroquel, Tegretol, and she had a prescription for Xanax, but she said that she hasn't taken it in a long time. She is a dog groomer by trade, so pretty low income as well. And then, like I said, she said that she's actually been kind of had a relationship with recovery for a really long time and gone back and forth, and was doing really well for, I think it was about 10 years is what it was. And so there was some lack of future in dog grooming, as she put it. And she's like, I don't want to spend the rest of my life as a dog groomer. I'm 37 years old. What I've always really wanted to do, which you'll love this, was go to EMT school. And she's already signed up at ACC for the fall of next year. She's trying to work her way towards going to EMT school and getting her EMT basic.
Good. So kind of your case shows that, people overdose for many reasons. And it's sometimes our job to kind of dig in a little bit and figure out how can we point them in another direction. So you already showed that, right? She's got external issues with employment or bipolar disorder, these psychosocial issues with the girlfriend, and then the stress involved of all of those things led her down a path of relapse. And we all know this disease is a chronic relapsing disease like diabetes and asthma and obesity and everything else. And I think you even pointed that out. She had a long period of sobriety. And then when things got a little rough from all these different reasons, she started using again because those protective mechanisms that she had developed during her recovery weren't utilized or she couldn't use them to her advantage. So, Mike, tell us a little bit more about this never use alone, because the people on this call, I bet, don't know what that is and what kind of a resource that might be.
Yeah, Never Use Alone is amazing, as well as Safe Spot is another one, and then there's the Brave app, which is another one that's on all the phones as well, and it's just an app version of it, and it's essentially a place that you can just call, and there's an operator there. Their slogan is "No judgment, we just want to help." Kind of thing. I think is one of those slogans I read in one of those ads for it. But it's just a person on the other end of the phone said, "Hey, I care about you. I just want you to be safe. Let's talk." And they will sit there and they say, "Hey, I'm about to do something a little sketchy, and I'm all alone, and I want to be safe." And so then they put together a safety plan, and then they get started. The other two that were mentioned were the Brave app, which is on the app stores for Apple and what you call it, and then Safe Spots is another one. That one's relatively new. But they're doing well as well. But it's basically just a safe place to use, and so that somebody can look after you. And then if you stop responding to them, they will enact the safety plan and alert 911. And we have been putting this. Part of our program is we follow up with every overdose, and part of that overdose follow up is just a harm reduction conversation. Like, hey, if you're going to do something sketchy and you're all alone, here's some options for you so that you can be safe, and we can help keep you safe. And so we've been giving this number out to a lot of people for a very long time, and we get a lot of calls through them actually nowadays.
Great. So that's something I just picked up on that we're not doing in my area that we probably need to do. Good. Maybe you could put those links in the app in the chat for us. Yeah. Anybody out there got any questions or comments on this case? It's spring break. Everybody's quiet.
Yeah, I mentioned that I was telling Dr. Escott when I saw you in San Diego. I was telling Dr. Escott about the Never Use Alone sites, and he immediately thought of the idea of how we could use AI to do that.
Maybe we'll just take the silence to say that was a great presentation, great case. We had, and also good didactic where everyone's just like, wow, solid stuff today.
So as a clinician, I'm a prescriber, right? And so I'm going to hand off the CBT to our other professionals. And it's good to get reminded about what role that plays. So most of our recovery is multimodal, right? It's peer support. It's helping them through relapse. It's getting them on med. It's getting their mental health issues resolved or at least addressed. It's cognitive behavioral therapy so they can make better decisions. It's helping them get an ID. It's helping them getting their socioeconomic issues squared around, or even their mental health issues squared around that may be leading them chronic pain or whatever. So I think it's important to remind ourselves that it's not just one person helping. It's a family. It's a neighborhood. It's a system of care that really helps keep these people safe and keep them on the road to recovery. And when they fall off that road, then we need to kind of nudge them back onto the process using the same resources that maybe they've used before. So I think that was a good example of how public safety can impact an individual and then navigate them into a care plan.
I agree 100%. One of the things that I constantly talk about is how I believe there's really two. Everybody can agree there's really two sides to substance use, right? There's using, and then there's recovery. And when we're in the using realm, we do harm reduction. We do whatever we have to do to keep people alive until they're ready to bridge the gap and start into the recovery world. And the recovery looks different for everybody. And what I feel like happens is in between those two places, there tends to be a crisis type situation that happens a lot of times. And frankly, who's better at navigating a crisis than we are, right? So we have a responsibility to the community to take ownership of that space in between those two things and support people while they're in that dark and scary place.
Great. Any other questions or comments from the gallery? We've got, there's not a lot of people on today. Oh, actually there is. I just had to go to page 2.
Another interesting case, if we do it, would be interesting to talk about the first time that we used buprenorphine at the scene of an overdose, because we were convinced that ideally you're just going to at least protect somebody, right, and make things better for them going forward, and at least keep them safe for 24 hours if they're not ready to engage in treatment and all that kind of stuff. The very first time that we did it, the guy had a cows of like 18 or something like that. We dosed him and he was so amazed at how he felt. He was like, can you help me stay on this? And from the scene of an overdose, we scheduled him an appointment with the clinic. We made a plan to dose him for 5 days. And he said, can you help my girlfriend too? And we were like, absolutely. And so like a day or two later, we ended up starting her on buprenorphine and then carried the both of them for about 4 or 5 days. I think Adam can answer this question because he knows him better and he's on the chat. But basically the last time I checked, they've been sober and recovery now for like 3 months. Both of them have been engaging. So,
Mike, this is Brandon. I would love that to be a whole separate session here in Echo. I was going to ask you about it, and I presume it's a voluntary induction. You don't administer it to an unconscious person to reverse an overdose, which buprenorphine theoretically could. You give it to a conscious person at the scene as a first responder to induct treatment on the spot.
Yeah. It's the COG that we wrote said that if they're experiencing precipitated withdrawal post Narcan and the cows is greater than 13, we can go ahead and go with a 16 milligram dose. If it's under 13 and mild, we'll give an 8 milligram dose and just monitor for a little bit and give more if we need to, and then just manage the withdrawals that come from it.
So one last question, because it's fascinating, and I want to stress I'd love to do a whole session on this because it's really pioneering. New Jersey's doing a little bit of this. Do you give it is the use the on-label use of treatment, or is the use really like the off-label use of withdrawal reduction?
In that situation, it's, hey, let's make you feel better and keep you safe. Like you feel bad now, let me make you feel better, and then we'll reevaluate tomorrow when we come back to follow up with you. If you want to stay on meds, we'll keep you on them when we come see you tomorrow. Or if you decide that you don't want to stay on meds, then we'll give you some resources and let you know when you're ready. You call us and we'll be here for you.
No, I love that it's an off-label sort of you know what I mean? It's a slightly off-label use of the drug that works. Is somebody evaluating this?
We just started doing this not too long ago. Dr. Abraham came to me last year and said, figure it out, make sure see if it'll work. And so went through the whole process of writing a new clinical operating guideline and getting them approved and bringing in some of our addiction medicine experts here in town to look at. And I talked to Dr. Glenn up in Arizona about it as well, a whole bunch as we were putting it together. And so we've only gone live for a couple of months now with doing that. And it works beautifully when we do it right.
Super exciting.
I was going to say, Brandon, San Antonio is going to be doing a clinical trial on this starting whenever it gets approved by the RB. But this has been done in the California Bridge program, in Alameda, San Francisco, Contra Costa County. It's been done in New Jersey. It's been done in a lot of different places, and it's been very successful as a bridge to recovery.
As a chief of police in Vermont, I was begging EMS to do this. So I'm so excited that it's happening.
Yeah, it actually may not be in there, unfortunately, in a lot of places' scope of practice. So in California, they actually had to get a waiver. In Texas, we don't have to worry about that because we can do off-label stuff, anything we want. We're a delegated practice state. But other states, this is a problem because it's not in their scope of practice.
Super. Thank you. Thanks for indulging my question.
Well, I guess we got to wrap up because it's that time. And Julio's giving me the business here. All right. So today we had a great didactic. on behind the scenes of the cognitive behavioral therapy, and more in our incarcerated population, but will apply to all patients who use that type of therapy. So we got an under the hood look of what happens in cognitive behavioral therapy and what that looks like for decision making change. And then we had Mike give us a great case of how a client in trouble was able to use harm reduction resources, the never use alone process. EMS actually responded with a compassionate treatment plan that actually led her back into recovery, into the process, and what that looked like for her. We also kind of dug in a little bit on some of the motivational things that led to her use and exacerbation of her recovery. And so we talked a little bit about that. And then we had a little teaser on the end where we talked about buprenorphine rescue after precipitate withdrawal, which is an off-label use of the drug to help people feel better. So they overdosed, they were dying, we made them alive. Now they're miserable. Now we start them on drug to make them feel better, and also then get them a taste of what a recovery MAT program might feel like, literally, when they get to be seen the next day or get referred to clinic. So good session here, folks. Julio, I turn it over to you, buddy.
Thank you, Dr. Miramontes. And thank you all for joining today's ECHO session. As a reminder, to earn continuing education credits, please complete a post-session survey using the link in the chat. If you would like to present a case, please email BWellTexas team at bwelltexas@utesca.edu. We look forward to seeing you at our next session on Thursday, March 10th at 11 a.m. Central. Have a great rest of your day, and we will be sharing our didactics and resources that were shared today. Thank you all so much.